But
yeah, it's a top secret information. We went to a seminar with Joe Bennett and Tom Purvis. If you don't know who Tom Purvis is, he's very, I don't know how old he is, probably like in his 50s, but
I feel like he's like 60.
I've heard him referred to as essentially the godfather of biomechanics. He has been in the research field of exercise, biomechanics, hypertrophy, all that stuff for a very long time, longer than I've been alive, which was just funny because we were pulling up videos, we were watching him talk at a university from like 1995. And we're just like, holy shit, this guy's been doing this longer than we've been alive. And then I just envisioned some fucking scrawny 17-year-old debating with him on TikTok. It's like, shut the fuck up.
It makes sense why he gets, pretty pissed off about all these, new trends, or not even new trends, just trends that have recirculated over decades. But he was even, we saw a video of him doing an infomercial for Bowflex back in the 80s. Like, that's how far back he's been doing this, talking about the same stuff that we talk about now. And even I saw on his Instagram back in like 10 years ago, he was posting the same concepts that are popular now on social media. And so, it's pretty crazy to think from that perspective, looking at the fitness industry now and what it's going to be like when we're that age, looking at, whatever social media platform exists then, the metaverse, or,
Yeah. Well, he was definitely ahead of the curve. At least that's what it seems like. Maybe I need to hold this closer. Maybe like over here.
I feel like it makes sense to be up close.
But we went to a 2-day seminar with them, and essentially, if you guys follow me, you guys know that I love Joe. I really want to get Joe on the podcast, which I will eventually do here. I'm confident of it, especially because I live in Tampa now, and I know he's not far. So we'll make it happen somehow, some way at one point or another. But I like Joe because he's obviously very smart. He's been around for a while, and he's very nuanced. He understands the nuances. He doesn't make black and white statements, or as they were saying, generalized absolutes, right? Which is what we see everybody in this industry constantly do, make these polarizing statements, because that's what sells. It's easy. People don't want to hear I don't know or it depends, when that is the reality of pretty much 99% of the questions. Obviously, if you say something like dumbbell curls going to work biceps, yes, it's a fucking black and white answer. But should you be doing dumbbell curls personally? Is it a bad exercise? It's like you can't say yes or no, and that's what everybody runs around social media saying. But Joe understands that. Joe is very big on nuance and how much context matters. And the reason why he's like that, and the reason why really anybody who's like that is because of experience, right? The only people who aren't like that are the people who lack experience, maybe not even in regards to working with themselves, because people can, provide their own results and have their own anecdotes, and then, start to find that information and start to persuade themselves that like, this is going to be the most optimal way, and this is what's going to steer me forward because of the literature that we have to back this now. But when you actually have experience working with so many people, then you really understand how much nuance there is, because you could work with somebody that all this shit has worked for you, and then none of it works for them, and vice versa. So that's where he really comes in and is able to, I guess, provide that sort of wisdom in a sense.
Yeah, and it's real world application, because you can look at any study you want and you can see one study says this and one study says the opposite. And if you're basing everything that you're preaching and implementing on studies based on other people, based on different, types of people, demographics, then you're just going to be, you're going to be wrong eventually. But if you can understand that everybody's different and nothing is actually optimal for everybody, and that's what we're talking about, is the absolutes, the generalized absolutes. That's the problem, is people saying this is the best way to train. This is for a fact. This is how you should be doing things. And, what if somebody likes something, doesn't like something? What if somebody can understand something better than something else? Like somebody might not be able to, fully contract their lats on a lat pullover, and they can get better at it. Or there's so many examples of where understanding where the person's at and meeting them there versus just telling them, you got to learn how to do this because this is what's optimal. You got to do upper lower. You got to do full body because this is what's optimal. Where what if somebody just performs better or believes in something better? They want to do a bro split for a year, 2 years, 5 years. And because they want to do that and they believe in it, that's where that passion and that actual effort is going to come from, versus if they're just told to do something, they might not execute it as well, even though it is on paper more optimal. So that's understanding the nuance of it.
There's so many holes in what's on paper, and that's what the majority of people don't realize. And I've talked about this, I feel like, on every fucking podcast that I've done at this point, so I don't want to really dive too deep into that. But let's talk about some of these general absolutes that people make, right? So the first one that really comes to mind is a more stable exercise variation is always a better choice, right? And that's not entirely true because, again, it all comes down to context. So why would a less stable exercise be a better choice?
I mean, there's multiple reasons. So there's the obvious arguments of why a stable exercise might be better. You know, I wouldn't tell someone to, like, if they want to build muscle, I'm not going to tell them to do a dumbbell bench on a yoga ball, because now they're going to be using other muscles, they're going to be using their abs more, taking away from the target muscles.
No, but that's an extreme example. So let's walk us back just to the first point. If anybody's listening who doesn't understand this or hasn't heard this, because I do think I do have some listeners here that aren't even involved in that community and don't even see the shit that's going on. If you talk to people who are actually involved in bodybuilding, like, they're completely unaware of what the mass majority of the general population of fitness is online regurgitating. They don't even pay any mind to it. But a more stable exercise is deemed a better choice for hypertrophy because it allows you to just maximize motor unit improvement to that target tissue and not have other things take away, trying to focus on stabilizing the movement per se, which is true, right?
It is to an extent, because motor unit recruitment doesn't just have to do with how many muscle fibers you're using. So, you know, let's take a machine chest press versus a dumbbell chest press. Yes, theoretically, you can utilize more of the motor neurons that innervate the chest or the pec muscle fibers, therefore having more motor unit recruitment, meaning more motor neurons connected to the muscle fibers. So in theory, yes, you'll be able to target your chest better on a machine, but that's not the only thing that goes into it in terms of stability. There's also the aspect of intensity and also just loading the muscles, the joint, other muscles. Like, it's not a bad thing to target other muscles as well. And, you know, why would you want to avoid something that's, you know, a free weight movement forever? I think the benefit in it is simply just the fact that it's another tool in your tool belt to be a better athlete. And I think if we can just, you know, look at bodybuilding as not just, you know, targeting specific muscle fibers, but also, you know, this is a full body thing. We're not, you know, trying to do single leg, you know, one leg shoulder presses with a dumbbell. Obviously that's, you know, an extreme. But I think if we can implement at some point in our training careers, doesn't have to be all the time, but it doesn't have to be never. If we can implement free weight movements at some capacity, I think it's only going to be a benefit. But I do know that there is going to be a drawback if we were to always keep it in or only do free weight movements. So let's say, like, another example would be, going back to the dumbbell chest press versus the machine chest press. I personally like to do a dumbbell chest press just because of I'm not locked into a certain plane of motion. And so it allows me to move naturally with how my own skeletal, you know, musculoskeletal system wants to move, when my structure wants to move. That's the benefit of it. I also simply just enjoy benching some dumbbells, and there's that mental component that goes into that set. And I think that intensity is the other component of motor unit recruitment that I was talking about. Is it's not just isolating certain muscle fibers to use as much capacity of your nervous system towards those muscles, but also just more raw total stimulus that you're putting on your body is also a big factor in motor unit recruitment. And so it's not generally a bad thing. Same with, let's say like a partial cable lateral raise versus a dumbbell lateral raise. Ignoring the resistance profile, if we're making the argument of, well, a dumbbell lateral raise is also going to involve your traps. So because you're now also using your traps, now you're, you know, not just targeting your lateral.
Well, that's also just due to poor execution.
Not necessarily. I mean, if you're overusing your traps, yes. But your traps are going to be involved no matter what on a lateral raise.
Any lateral raise, though.
Right. But I'm saying like a partial cable where you're only doing the bottom range of motion, just trying to target the lateral delt, because then you're isolating that muscle, right?
Sure, but that would be retarded.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying we shouldn't be scared of fatigue, of using other muscles in movements. We don't need to treat every single exercise as an isolation exercise or targeting just one muscle. I think there's a benefit in targeting multiple muscles in one movement.
Okay. Let's walk back to the dumbbell press. That I think maybe I need to be closer to the mic. Maybe that sounds a little better, right? But with like a dumbbell chest press, let's say, for example, or a free weight squat compared to a hack squat, so chest press versus dumbbell press, people over exaggerate the stability demands of the movement, right? Because it's just learning, developing the motor skill, right? First time you get on a fucking bike, you can't, you want to fall over, you can't ride the bike, and then eventually you do it enough times, you're smooth sailing, it's no issue, right? So is the machine still more stable? Yes. Is that better in a hypertrophy context on paper? Maybe to some degree based off literature, but is that actually going to produce better results for the individual in practical application? One, depending on the axis of the type of machine they have to, because not all just machines are just better because they're stable. There are a lot more shitty machines than there are good ones, right? It was outweigh by far the amount of bad equipment we have access to than good ones. If you have access to really great equipment, yeah, I'd want to fucking use it all the time too. But most of the time, the reason why we're even opting for movements is because we don't have the best pec deck machine or the best chest press machine. Because if you did, you want to fucking use it, right? And not to say that you can't use the other machines, but doing these freeweight movements, as you practice them and get better at it, that stability demand is diminished, not entirely, but it's like the difference between that and then doing a chest press machine is, I would say, negligible once you become actually proficient at that movement and are able to drive that movement with the target tissue. When you're able to perform a dumbbell press the way that you see Nick Walker, Jay Cutler, they're able to just move it with their chest, right? I mean, you and I can both do it. It doesn't really take, I don't want to say it doesn't take that long, because it can take long. Like, I don't know at what point that stability demand becomes essentially, I would think less and less as you just get bigger and bigger, because then you just have better control over the muscle. But at first, I mean, probably a few weeks really until you're really able to just nail down the movement and be comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think it's a great example of just being able to turn a freeweight movement into something that's similar to a machine. So let's say a barbell squat. If somebody has never barbell squatted or hasn't done it in a very long time, and then they go ahead and barbell squat because they, think they want to try something new, it's probably not going to be optimal because they're going to be way less stable than in a machine. But that's
optimal
not necessarily
for hypertrophy.
Optimal for hypertrophy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because let's say with the dumbbell bench, I basically treat that like a machine because of how long I practiced this for. I've been doing this for years, and I've gotten way better at the machine, at the movement, I mean. And now it looks like a machine where my starting point is going to be the exact same point at every single rep. I come down, I get to the same spot. I get to the same spot every single rep. And so I'm treating it like a machine because of my ability to stabilize in that movement. That doesn't just come naturally like how it does with a machine. So short term, yes, a machine is going to be better for hypertrophy, but that doesn't mean that we should avoid freeweight movements. Obviously, bodybuilders have gained muscle over time from using dumbbells and barbells. It works. Is it optimal? I would say, you can't say black and white. Is it optimal? Is it not? I think it's a tool.
Again, optimal is all contextual, right? It entirely depends on that specific scenario, what the exact goal is. But at the end of the day, once you get good at a freeweight movement that requires more stability, right? The stability demand is just going to become less of an issue, right? So it's not something I don't think it's something really anybody needs to worry about. I think you should become proficient in all movements, have more tools in your toolbox. The last thing you want to do is fucking build your base off of machines for the first 2 years, and then you travel somewhere and the machine's not there, and now you got to do a dumbbell press and your fucking shoulders are shaking everywhere and you feel like shit because you have no idea how to execute this movement properly, and you don't have the coordination or stability demands, built.
Yeah,
the whatever demands. But you said you essentially want to make the movement like a machine, which is a good point, because it's something that I always say to clients as well, is, especially when we're going over like barbell squats and whatnot, because the way people, when they approach free weights, a lot of people approach it differently. I don't want to say approach it differently than the machine, because the machine just puts you into place, right? But with a free weight movement, you have just so much more freedom. And essentially, like, the way that you're performing a barbell squat, this should look like you're on a hack squat. It shouldn't look any different, right? You want the hips underneath the spine, at least if we're like trying to target quads. You your form should look like you are a machine. Right. You should look almost robotic as you're performing it. Obviously, given intensity, going hard, all of that things aside, the way that you're moving should look like you are attached to a fucking machine.
Right. And I'm thinking about it from my own perspective, anecdotally. Why do I like doing a dumbbell press? Why does it feel weird to not do it? It's because if I were to completely cut out dumbbell benching and, for a long period of time, when I'm able to do it, in my own head, I could see that I might start getting a little bit tighter, less range of motion, less mobility, just because I'm not practicing loading my body in certain positions with heavy loads using free weights. So I think it's also making me, yes, more mobile, but also potentially putting me less at risk for injury. And so that's another reason why I like to just put myself into these positions with heavy loads, let's say like a full stretch on a dumbbell bench with, 100 something pounds in each hand. That I feel like is just benefiting my body as a whole, bulletproofing my shoulder joint, my elbows, to where I'm able to go do that. Like in the example you said, if I'm traveling and I go to a gym that doesn't have a good machine and I have to dumbbell bench, I'm not going to be fucked. So that's a huge benefit as well.
And it's just fucking fun to do. It's fun to fucking drive up some weight on a dumbbell press, on a squat, if you're able to do squats effectively.
Like people have the argument that, you can be fully intense in a hack squat or a machine chest press. Yeah, you can be intense. But again, anecdotally, maybe it's just because I just enjoy that movement so much, a dumbbell bench. I'm going to have more intensity in that set because it's just a higher demand on my psychology, but also on my brain, on my body. I mean, so there's just more that goes into it. There is the fact that I'm more prone to injury in that movement. I could drop the dumbbell on my face. I could die. So that little bit of fear kind of gives me a little extra boost of that intensity of seriousness of like, I have to lock in. This is not just in a machine that I can just start moving. Like this is a serious thing, and I'm going to take it more serious. When there's a higher demand, it requires more effort. So I'm putting myself in that situation, and automatically, just in my experience, I'm not saying this is for everybody, and it's definitely not for everybody for a beginner, but at least just for myself, and many people probably too, is I'm just going to have more intensity in a set of a dumbbell bench. Now the counter argument to that would be, well, you're attacking your central nervous system more. I'm not doing 5 sets of it. I'm doing 1 or 2 sets. And so I think I'm having a good balance of being able to do the things that I enjoy, doing the things that I can put full intensity to, and then go into my machine chest press and basically just nail all the tools in the tool belt, doing everything that I can, that I want to do, and I'm progressing. And that's really as simple as it is. It's an individual journey, bodybuilding. Do what you want to do, progress on it. If it feels good and it's working, why change it? Just because there's a study that says, actually, that's not optimal, this is optimal. You can try that if you want, and especially if you're a beginner, try things. I think that's another big problem in just the industry itself, is people are staying too theoretical and not just getting the experience and trying things. So if you're scaring yourself, if you're in paralysis by analysis, and you're like, well, this person's saying to do full body, this person's saying upper lower, this person's saying push pull legs, this person's saying push pull legs is suboptimal, you got to take a rest day in between all 3 days. There's so much nuance, there's so much polarizing information of people saying this is the best thing that you can do, just referring to everybody, that the best thing that you can do is to fucking try something. Try it, see how you like it. Try it for 3 months, 6 months. And from there, not only will you see if you like it or not, and you can stick with it for a long time, but also you're going to learn from it. And then also, another thing is, this isn't a 1-year sport, a 2-year sport. This is, ideally a lifelong sport. And so I've tried things in the past where I didn't like them, when I was 2 years, 4 years into training. And then I throw it in, let's say like an upright row. I hated those. Those were always, the worst exercise in my head. Why the fuck would I do an upright row? You're more prone for injury. And then guess what? I started doing them. My delts have been growing. My shoulders feel fine. Why not do them for a period of time? If you want to do them and they feel good and you're progressing on them, why not try something? And then take it out once it's not feeling good, or if you want to try something else. That's the beauty of being able to individualize your training over time. Is it's up to you. It's not based on a study. Just do what you want.
Well, an upright row is only more dangerous if you don't know how to fucking do it.
If you don't know how to do it, obviously it's more dangerous. Yeah. So I wouldn't, just start telling a beginner to start rowing 50-pound dumbbells.
Something you keep talking about is what you enjoy, the fun aspect, which is interesting because that is a huge, very important aspect, right? Why should I do intensifiers? Why should I do this? Why should I do that? And it's like, really, in a lot of these cases, you can just disregard whatever fucking scientific theory literature you want to bring up. At the end of the day, if you like doing something and it drives you, that is the number one factor. And I say that with 12 years of experience now, coaching for over 5 years. This is what is sustainable for people. It's why people, not why everybody gets into it, but you don't want to do something that you really just thoroughly do not enjoy doing. Obviously, that's not going to be very sustainable. I'm not saying that, especially as a competitive bodybuilder, if you want to get higher ranks, there are going to be time frames where you're probably going to have to do shit that you don't really like doing. But you see this all the time online. I always see these kids saying, another thing with these kids is a lot of them accredit, oh, I make so much more progress once I switch to this split, which is just a retarded statement to make. But these kids have also been training for like 2-3 years, right? So I don't have anything against the splits that they're using, the approach to exercise, but the reality is for a lot of these situations that prior to doing that, they were literally just doing bullshit and had no idea how to do anything. So then they finally started doing something that was decent,
That's structure.
and had structure to it, and now it's, oh my god, this is the best thing ever. It's like, you don't know what the best thing ever is. You have been training for less than 5 years. You have no fucking idea. And how many people have you trained? How many results have you provided for other people? And the answer to that is none in virtually every single case from people that I see saying this. And it's them saying that I don't train for fun, I train for results, which is an insane statement. I don't think you'd ever hear a bodybuilder say that statement. I mean, you hear bodybuilders say that shit, like, I don't eat for taste, I eat for results, which is, it's different. It's not really comparable, but
Right.
training for results, it's like you're going to get results with numerous fucking approaches. If you think that there's one approach, this full body, upper body, lower, split 4 days a week, never do more than X amount of reps, I'm going to minimize all physique, this is the best thing ever, this is going to provide me the most results ever, and you don't want to do anything outside of that because I don't train for fun, I train for results, that is it's a hindering mindset. You're looking at everything, you're very one-track minded. And again, if you don't enjoy what you're doing, because another thing about training, to me, is all about challenging yourself. Doing, like, sometimes you just go into the gym and just do shit, just to fucking challenge yourself. How many fucking reps can we do with this today? It doesn't matter if it's 30, doesn't matter if it's fucking 40, which I really would never do, but just as a fucking extreme example, I guess. Or, let's just do this superset, or let's do a triple drop set on this, let's do a rest pause on this, let's do something crazy, let's see how far we can go, let's see what we're actually made of. And those are the sessions where you really just look back and you're like, wow, that was crazy. And it's a big part of this bodybuilding process, training process, is it's not about necessarily the end result, which might sound stupid to people who haven't accomplished anything because I just want to get there. A lot of this whole thing is the lifestyle, right? People are too one-track minded, focused on, I need to get here, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but this whole journey is about the experiences within it. And I hear saying this, it sounds kind of corny, but it's true. Like, I can think back to all the best training sessions I ever had, and it's like when we did some crazy shit, it's like, oh, that was a fun workout, that was a good day. It's like, maybe that's not shit that I would do all the time, but if you're afraid to constantly go out of the box because of this idea that it's not going to be the best approach, you're going to take away from your experiences, potentially away from progress that you could have made by exploring things that you thought weren't necessarily the best due to some abstract or some study you read. I think you're leaving a lot on the table by limiting yourself from exploring different training methodologies, using types of intensifiers, using higher rep ranges. And people will hear this and just argue, okay, well, what does any of that have to do with actual results that will be provided, right? Because you could do this for fun. Like, I can't necessarily tell you. There's no way for me to tell you this is the thing. It's like, I wish I had some scientific argument, because that's what they want. They want an answer as to, okay, well, what if I do more than 8 reps? What exactly is going to happen? What's the exact mechanism? I can't fucking tell you. But what I can tell you is that I have had numerous clients, many clients, and the way that I have them train legs, it's not fucking less than 8 reps for a lot of shit. And every time I post my guys with legs, everybody always comes in my DMs or comments on the shit and is like, why do all your clients have great legs? Maybe there's a correlation there. I don't fucking know. But what I do works, and it works better than what the majority of other people are doing. And I'm sure you've heard many other bodybuilders say the same shit, but it's just anecdotes. Doesn't matter, right?
Until they create a study 10 years from now showing, oh, there is this mechanism for higher rep leg training that actually, is symbiotic, actually helps with the mechanical tension. It's not just mechanical tension by itself that causes hypertrophy. Maybe there's an aspect of, just forcing as much blood, nutrients, growth factors into the muscle as possible to help recovery. That might be something that eventually there could be a study on with advanced bodybuilders on PEDs as well, even, or naturals too. But one example I wanted to talk about with what we were talking about before, with doing what you enjoy and what you believe in versus just what's optimal is, I used to go to a gym where there was a Miss Olympia competitor. She was in women's physique, and she got like top 5 at the Olympia. She was fucking jacked. She was
Geared out, super viralized to the max.
100%. But when she was in prep, getting ready for the Olympia, 4 weeks out, 3 weeks out, 1 week out, she was still doing barbell movements with low reps, doing 1 rep, 3 rep sets with, a barbell squat, with, a barbell bench, because one, that gym didn't have, that much equipment, machine wise, but also she came from a powerlifting background, and it's what built her physique. You can still build muscle from powerlifting. It's probably not as optimal as bodybuilding training, but she built her physique while she was powerlifting. And so because that's a part of her belief system that shit works, she was able to execute that with full belief and full intent, even though it wasn't on paper scientifically optimal. And I've even talked to her about this, where like maybe if she were to do, a machine instead when she's 1 week out, 2 weeks out, or, maybe don't do a 1 rep max and you're fucking 2 weeks out, these things that seem obvious to the average, science-based TikToker, she was just doing what she wanted to do, and she went and placed 5th at the Olympia. How are you going to argue with the results? So sure, theoretically, could Ronnie Coleman have had a better physique, or Branch Warren, could he have had a better physique with, you can hear the cats in the background, can't you?
You hear my cat?
Yeah.
She's screaming. Melfi.
So theoretically, could Ronnie Coleman and Branch Warren have built better physiques, or have had less injuries potentially with better physiques if they trained more optimally? I think the best argument is that they wouldn't have had as good of a physique or as good of a career if they trained any differently, because it's what they believed in, it's what they enjoyed, it's what they wanted to do, and that level of passion and effort goes a long way in the small moments of where you don't actually want to do shit. When you're doing that final rep, if you're fully charged mentally and you want to do this, why this is working, there is those small little details of where that's actually going to benefit you, versus if it's just something that, you're bored with, or if it's something that you were just told to do and don't actually understand why you're doing it. You're probably, even though it is more scientifically optimal, I would argue that you're probably not going to see the same results long term if you don't fully understand it or don't fully believe in it. You're just told to do it because it's optimal.
I think we need to stop saying scientifically optimal, because everything that we're doing is rooted in science, right? There's nothing about training that isn't science based. It's all based in science. I think really it's more so we should say like literature based optimal, I guess. Literature based optimal, we should say no experience based optimal. That's what we should really call it. But
well, you can make the most progress when you're not experienced.
Of course.
So that's optimal, to just not train.
Yeah. Not train and get your newbie gains in. What the fuck did you just say? Ronnie Coleman, Branch Warren? I think Branch Warren probably could have had a better physique, honestly, because Branch Warren did some crazy shit. I don't think Ronnie Coleman could have done anything differently that would have provided a different outcome. It's like, how much better do you want to get? Oh, if Ronnie Coleman did fucking hack squats, it's like, did you see Ronnie Coleman's legs? Hack squats weren't making anything better.
Right.
Branch could have been better though, so we don't know. It's possible. There's nobody knows anything. This is another thing we come back to is you're probably going to hear in this episode a lot. You probably have heard in a lot of my content, a lot of my podcasts before that you say, I don't know, or it depends. And again, people don't like that answer because people just want a simple, straightforward answer. And if that's what you're looking for, you're not going to get it. You're going to get it from people who are lying to you or who are ignorant enough to think that they know everything. And nobody knows everything. Nobody knows what is the most optimal approach. Nobody knows what is going to be inherently the best for you. What could be inherently the best for you today could be different a year from now. That's just how it works. There are progressions that you go through, and there's different circumstances, whatever's going on in your life. What does that person's job look like? What is their trainee level? What do they enjoy doing? How are their joints? Like, there's just so many things that go into this to the point where it's like for somebody to say, oh, this machine or this approach is the absolute best for hypertrophy. It's like, sure, based off of the literature that you're interpreting here, if all these variables are in place and everything is under these exact right specific conditions, sure, that could probably be the best optimal approach. But guess what? In the real world, that is not how it ever works, ever. So people present it as that because, again, polarizing statements are what generate traction, attention. People just want to hear a quick, short answer. They don't want to hear, I don't know, it depends. And it's like, I don't know. It does depend. It always depends. And
100%.
A lot of the stuff that we're saying here in regards to, using the higher rep ranges for legs or maybe calves or anything of that, which we have seen success with over and over again. And it's not even just enhanced guys. There's natural guys as well that I've seen this work with numerous times. Same thing for delts. I can't tell you why. I don't know, but it just does anecdotally. And maybe there's a point in time where we'll figure it out. Because people, for some reason, over the past few years think that we've come to the end of scientific development and there's no further research that needs to be done to figure shit out. It's like once we came to the conclusion that mechanical tension is the primary driver of hypertrophy, that everything else is out the window and there's no possible way that there's something that we haven't even thought of or explored that could be contributing to these mechanisms, to some type of mechanism that is assisting in a different outcome of how that physique is going to develop. We don't know. And anybody that says they do know is full of shit. That's to say that science will not develop any further from this point on, that we've reached the end of it, which is an insane statement to make, especially with all the anecdotes that we have, right? Anybody that's throwing anecdotal evidence out the window is also insane. So, I mean, I can't stress that enough. That is the biggest red flag out there. And I understand people want to make content. You have to make polarizing statements to get traction, because if you do just say, I don't know, it depends, like, it's very hard to gather an audience and get people to listen to you because you're not providing them an exact answer. And people don't want to sit here and they don't want to listen to actual logic and reasoning and theories and empirical evidence as to why these things could potentially work and try to understand everything behind it, or go through the process of trial and error with themselves or with clients. Like, people just want to know, what did the research find and what should I do? That's they just want to get straight to the point, and that's just not how it works.
Yeah. That's what you see on social media all the time is, always this, never this. And those people who are making those statements don't know your actual situation, which is what you were just talking about. But another example of it would be, you probably don't even know what injuries you might have that are underlying, or not even injuries, but let's say imbalances, or let's say if you just have some sort of issue with your tendons, with the actual muscles themselves, whether it's with your connection with those muscles, whether it's your ability to actually fire them. And, let's say like rear delts are a good example of, you can be using your rear delts in a rear delt fly, but you could also be allowing other muscles to be taking over. So you might not even be aware of those things. And if somebody's telling you, well, this movement is optimal, or let's say like I have a fucked up knee right now. And if somebody told me that quad extensions are the most optimal exercise for whatever science-based literature-backed reason, should I be doing quad extensions? No, I should be fixing the actual injury first. And that's why it's so person dependent that, like what I was going back to before, is just try, just experiment, do what works best for you. And if you don't know where to start, just start somewhere. Start with either hiring a coach, hiring a personal trainer, trying a training program. If you don't have any money, you can only spend $20 or get a free training program online. Like, you can have somewhere to start instead of just having to, figure shit out from TikTok videos where you're going to see polarizing things saying the absolute opposites of each other, that's just going to confuse you and make you not even want to try.
Well, you said you brought up rear delt flies, which just made me think, because another generalized absolute that we hear is that there's no reason to do more than 8 reps, right? And again, from a literature standpoint, maybe you could say that, sure, whatever. Again, we have the anecdotes with training specific muscle groups and what we've seen happen when we implement those types of methods. But aside from that, even, there are just movements that are better suited for higher rep ranges. And I've seen people try to argue against this, and it's insane, because if you argue against this, it's almost like you've never done a fucking exercise. Like a rear delt fly, and try to do a set of 4 to 8. Maybe you could do 8. I mean, it also depends. Like, you need to master that execution first and foremost, and know how to drive with the rear delt and not have the trap take over. And again, you have people send you videos. I have people send me videos. I'm looking over videos every single day of the fucking week, and rear delt flies is often one of those movements. And 9 out of 10 cases, it's somebody who hasn't mastered that movement is always just, they start with retraction. They start by pulling with the traps. They don't think of pushing onto the walls. They don't isolate the rear delt. I'm not saying that you can't involve the traps, but you need to understand how to drive with that target muscle. And the rear delt is significantly weaker than your traps, right? Yeah. So trying to use a weight that you could just do 4 to 6 reps with your rear delts is going to be incredibly difficult, right? Because there's like a gap, right? You go from 10 pounds to 20 pounds, and when you're using a muscle like that, that gap is huge. Right? It can make all the difference in how you're able to actually execute it. Even if you could get 12 reps with doing proper execution with like 20 pounds on a cable stack for rear delt flies, you bump it up to 30 and immediately everything breaks down, right? And you don't even realize it until you've really mastered it and know how to feel your rear delts fire, because you're just going through the motion, right? And now it turns into a trap exercise. Again, that's not inherently a bad thing if you want to do that. I think even as a beginner, like, fucking involve more muscles, that's fine. But you want to learn how to execute and master executing with intent for specific target muscles, right? If you're doing a rear delt fly, in most cases, it's probably because you're trying to hit your rear delts and not your traps, right? You could do rows, you could do other shit for your traps if you really want to get your traps involved. But again, this is like one of those movements where using higher rep ranges, in my experience and from everyone that I've worked with, using higher rep ranges is just more effective for approaching that movement. And as you get more experience with it, moving into those lower rep ranges really isn't as much of an issue as far as involving the traps and whatnot, because you know how to execute properly. And the same thing goes for, what's another movement? Like you said, lateral raises, the same thing. It's, again, this probably comes back to why delts are often better suited for higher rep ranges, at least in terms of the isolation movements, because of the overcompensation that does occur. Yep. But I don't know if what else would you say?
Yeah, so if, let's say you're doing a set of 4 versus a set of 12 on either a rear delt fly or a lateral raise.
A different movement.
No, different movement?
Yeah, what else would you say is a different movement where that occurs, where it's better suited for higher rep ranges?
I mean, I guess you could say biceps. You could theoretically, do a heavy set of, 4 even for biceps, but in that case, I think it'd be a different argument than the rear delts or lateral raises, because now you're potentially running into, more tendon strain. You're putting way more stress on that tendon, on the bicep tendon, that you wouldn't necessarily see if you were to lighten the load up a little bit. And if you're able to still train to failure with, let's say, 8 reps, 10 reps, 12 reps instead of, 3, 4, 5 reps, you're going to be able to replicate that again and again and again. And if you can stay consistent with that, that's what's going to build muscle, not just what you can do within one session. So, bicep curls would be another thing that I would, not.
I think it's mainly the delts, just because of the structure of the delts and how easy it is to overcompensate.
But because they're so small compared to all the surrounding muscles, you have the traps, even the rhomboids, are going to take over on a rear delt fly. But on a lateral raise, of course, you're going to see people, the biggest thing that people should look out for on movements such as, lateral raises and rear delt flies is what muscle is initiating the movement. And you can do this for every muscle, really. Look at, lats, look at your chest. Which muscle is contracting first to move the weight? If you're starting a lateral raise by lifting your shoulder, by elevating your shoulder blade, you're starting it with your trap. You're putting less stimulus on your lateral delt. Even though it's not bad to use your trap, you don't want to initiate a movement with a muscle that's not the target muscle. So on a rear delt fly, you could start the movement by leaning back. Same on like a lat pull down. If you start the movement by leaning back and then, let's say retracting your shoulders and then pulling down, yes, you're using your lats, or yes, you're using your rear delts if you're going into horizontal abduction. Yes, you're using the muscle, but you could be using you could be placing more of a stimulus on that muscle by starting the movement from that lengthened position or the stretched position of that muscle, and you're losing out, you're missing out on that benefit of that part of the movement.
But you're just overcompensating for the sake of getting up more weight. Right. With the bicep thing or like triceps, I don't think it's necessarily an issue. There is more tendon strain, but if you work within rep ranges, you're going to create those adaptations. So I don't think anybody really is getting injured doing that. But then there is also something to be said about, there's a huge difference between me and you doing this versus some 18-year-old kid because of the level of strength that we have, right? So there's a point where you just get so fucking strong that risk is inherently higher. People think it's relative, and it's not fucking relative, right? If you're doing a dumbbell curl for 4 reps with 100-pound dumbbells versus 30-pound dumbbells, there is a massive difference, and there's only so much that your tendons can really handle, and especially when you're using like the use of anabolic steroids, which obviously anybody who's curling that much is, you're growing and repairing muscle tissue much faster than your tendons are able to keep up with. So when you're at that point, you're using gear and you are getting a significant amount of tissue and you're at that level of strength, using those lower rep ranges specifically on certain movements can just be inherently a lot more risky. I'm not saying don't ever do it, but it's definitely something. It's also genetic too, the amount of resilience you have, right? How big your joints are, all those things play into effect. And people, this is again, like people throw around shit and think, oh, it's well suited for everybody. And I think we talked about this past weekend with the powerlifters and how all powerlifters have bigger joints. And that's why they're able to move like that and move that load. They're just designed to be strong fucking humans. They're more resilient for injuries compared to you take somebody who has very small bone structures and put them in that same position. Likely in a lot of scenarios, they're at a much higher injury risk and they usually can never get as fucking strong.
Yeah, that's me. I have small joints, and I've had tendonitis in almost all my joints multiple times. So it doesn't make sense for me specifically to do heavy sets of 4 to 6 on a dumbbell curl or barbell curl. Why would I do that when I could, knowing my own experience, just do a slightly higher rep set? I'm not saying to do sets of 30, but why would I not do 8 to 12 or even up to 15?
The fatigue.
I'm not getting that fatigue on a bicep curl. So that's also taken out of proportion. Doing a set of over 8 reps on a bicep curl versus, a barbell squat or a hack squat is going to be much different on your fatigue, to where I think it's kind of a pointless argument of fatigue when we're talking about training arms. I think the best mentality to have when it comes to training smaller muscles is train them as hard as they can recover from. Well, I think that's really how it is with every muscle, but especially with small muscle is they can take a beating and it's not going to really fuck with your central nervous system to where you're going to be, negatively affecting the next workout. Obviously, if you destroy your bicep.
Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not fatigue accumulation that's hindering the following workouts, right? So it's not necessarily just about that central nervous fatigue that you feel from like a hack squat or something like that. It's just what they think is going to carry over and negatively impair their ability to progress on the following days that they train, which like in theory, it's understandable, but it's really demonized and taken like you said, very far out of proportion to this point, to the point where like the majority of people talking about this, pretty much all the people talking about this for the most part, are not people that even need to worry about this, because there are people who don't even know how to train hard. And this comes back to another thing where everybody thinks they know how to fucking train hard. And you see it all. I see it all the fucking, I can't even go on TikTok at this point where you see it's somehow been overran even more so. They progressively overload the fucking algorithm with these retards. And they do like videos of them doing pull downs or tricep extension. And it's like a written caption over it. It's like, if you train this way, I know your IQ, or fucking, this is the best way to train. And these kids, again, know nothing. They don't even know how to do a fucking lap pull over, a lap pull down. They're going like this, and they're like lifting over. They think they're going hard, and they're just overcompensating in every aspect. And then they're doing fucking sets of 6 with 2 RIR. It's right. I mean, I can't. It's crazy. I don't know why anybody listens to these people, but why are we even talking about it? Is because of the fact that I'm constantly having to answer questions regarding this shit that's spewed by these kids, and then explain it to clients as well. And it's just shit, that conversations that don't even need to be had. It's just pointless shit being brought up over and over again. I don't even know why I brought that up. Why'd I bring that up?
Well, I mean, it's related to another thing is, the reason why these kids are training, with, one set of 4 reps on a tricep extension with 1 rep in reserve, thinking that that's hardcore, or training optimally, or training hard, going heavy like that. it benefits their ego to say that and think like that because they're going heavier. But I would bet $1 million that they would get much more out of, and I'm talking, the specific type of person I'm talking about is, let's say, a kid who's between 14 and 20, been training for less than 2 to 3 years. This type of kid who doesn't really have enough experience with training heavy, training hard, that type of person would get a lot more out of a set of, let's say, tricep extensions, doing a set of 8, 12, even throwing in an intensifier, because most likely they're going to be able to recover from it. Do you have to do an intensifier? No. Could they and potentially build more muscle? Maybe, because that type of person doesn't actually know what failure truly is. So if they, like, this is an argument for intensifiers, is when you're in the beginning stages of your training, between years, 1 to 5, not the first year. I don't think you need to throw in intensifiers within your first year of training, but that's going to allow you to actually see not only physically what your body is capable of, but also mentally. And that's going to have a huge carryover into long-term learning how to actually improve your pain tolerance and access parts of your brain that you didn't know you had available. Because if, let's take an extreme example, let's say like Nick Walker, I don't see him doing nowadays. I don't see him doing, crazy intensifiers on, like a leg press or something. And he might, I don't know. But, let's say if he's just doing a straight set of, 8, 12 reps on a leg press, he knows how to take that set way further than, a kid who's been training for 2 years. And so one reason is because he learned how to train fucking hard back when he was a teenager, from not limiting himself because of what's optimal, what, people say on social media.
It wasn't even like that until recently. Nobody trained like that. I mean, I built my physique from the time I was 13 when I started bodybuilding up until when I was probably until I was 18 or 19. I literally, I had a split, whatever my split was, I guess, at the gym. It's this is, what am I going to say? I figured it out. It was something different all the fucking time. And I still got fucking huge by the time I was 17 for being natural. Obviously, there's genetics. People can make whatever argument they want, but that's literally how the majority of people I knew trained, and it fucking worked for everybody. And then people come up with these new approach based off of literature. Again, there's nothing wrong with it, but the difference that people think it's going to make is it's really not. I would say it's negligible. I would, but again, it always depends. I don't know. Maybe it's going to fucking take you so much further, but from what we've seen in the past, it's everything fucking works. Everything works, and people really just drag it to the absolute max. Oh, the fatigue from this, the fatigue from barbell squats. Again, you're squatting fucking 225 pounds, right? People think this is relative, right? If I'm squatting 500 versus you squatting 235, it's the same amount of fatigue. It's not. It's entirely different. The only people who think this shit are the people who haven't surpassed a certain level of strength. The amount of toll that it takes on your body versus when you were weaker, it's a 90 difference. So I could make the argument for myself at this point, aside from the fact that my fucking spine was broken, it makes way more sense for me to use a more stable variant like a hack squat or pendulum squat. If I could barbell squat, I still probably would barbell squat sometimes. But just because the amount of effort that is required for me to actually do a working set with the amount of weight that I need for a barbell squat, whether it's 4 reps, 8 reps, or fucking 12 reps, it is so much more fatiguing than a hack squat would be, even though I can load the fuck out of a hack squat. Just because the amount of sheer load and effort required, it's at that point, yes, it makes more sense. And I'm not even talking from a stability perspective. Obviously, that plays into it, right? The more stability provided is going to make the movement less fatiguing. But if you're someone who's been training for 2-3 years, it's not necessarily the same. You could still get the same benefits as using a more stable variation, but that trade-off of how much more fatigue is going to be generated from the free weight movement with the amount of load that you're using and the effort that's required. If you've mastered that movement, you can execute it with proper intent. Mm-hmm. It's really drawn out of proportion. It comes down to, I guess, preference. And like we already said, I'm an advocate of having the most tools in your toolbox and mastering the execution of all things across the board.
Yeah. And then also going back to intensifiers, training hard, the idea of, the new optimal way of training, which is, well, it's not that new, but still, using RIR and implementing this in all of your sets or most of your sets, and keeping one in the tank, because then you're able to train more frequently. It's cool in theory, but in reality, when you're preaching this to a bunch of kids who are 16, been training for 1-2 years, they don't know what failure is. And I'm sure people have heard this before. You don't know what failure actually is. And so if you're training with RIR, you're holding yourself back by I applaud people who are trying to do things as optimally as possible and try to train smart, because why would you want to waste your time, waste your energy when you don't need to, right?
Retards in reserve.
But if you're going at it first, like if you're starting training with RIR before actually having that phase of seeing what you're actually capable of, then you are holding yourself back no matter what. I can't see how it's possible to know how to train to failure if you've never trained to failure.
Fuck RIR. I don't use RIR for any of my clients, really. I mean, I'm sure I have in the past. Maybe I do here and there, but I can't remember anything off the top of my head.
Like if they're coming back from being sick or, not training for months or something.
Well, I don't use it with anybody. I mean, again, I can't even think of it, but the only people that I would use it with is like a client that I really trust. I've overseen plenty of times. I know their level of intensity. I know that they know what true failure actually is, because again, most people don't, even though they think they do. A lot of people reach mental failure before they reach actual true failure. And again, whether that's on a set of 6 or 8 or 12, right? As you get into those higher rep ranges, it does get a little bit harder because of the cardiovascular requirement and because of like the mental fortitude you need to have. But even in those lower rep range sets, it's still, the mark is constantly missed by 99% of people. And I say that with absolute confidence. But
if we were to put like a blanket statement out there of,
a generalized absolute.
Yeah, if we were to put a generalized absolute out there of, for most people, what would be the best way to go about it?
Harder.
Yes, train harder. But I would say there's cons to doing too low of reps. There's cons to doing too high of reps. If you're doing too low of reps, you might be too far away from failure just because of all the reasons that go into it. You might just be going too heavy for you to actually have good execution. It might be hurting your joints, whatever it is. And then on the other end, if you're doing a set of 20 to 30, there's cardiovascular fatigue, there's, mental burnout, you're just getting bored. So I would say a safe bet would just be to do moderate rep range for most things.
Well, the one that has worked for fucking decades, right? That is constantly become, that has somehow become extinct now, but...
8 to 12. That's what's, like, I would consider a moderate rep range, 8 to 10, 8 to 12, even, 6 to 12, if you're doing most of your sets in that rep range, you're probably going to be fine. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to do a set of, 4 to 6, that's fine, especially if it's, more of a compound movement. I think, try it. And then, if you want to do a set of, 15 to 20, 20 to 25, try it. See how you like it. It might be fun. It might be beneficial. And it's a good way to change things up too. But I would say if you're trying to overemphasize the optimality of training and you're only utilizing certain tools on the tool belt, you're only doing 4 to 6 for all of your sets, or you're only doing 15 to 20, which I don't know if anybody's doing 15 to 20 anymore, but like for all the sets, I'm saying, overemphasizing just one section because that's supposedly optimal. Now you're holding yourself back. That's the mentality that I would go with, is don't leave any tools out of your tool belt over time. Of course, there can be phases where you aren't using a certain tool. That's perfectly fine. You can go a phase without using any free weights. That's fine. But I would say, over the course of 10 years, you should have experimented with basically everything to simply just understand how you like them, how they work, and also to be able to help others. If somebody has a question of, how do I do a barbell squat? If you've never fucking barbell squat, how are you going to be a good trainer or a coach if you want to do that? Yeah. Just because you're trying to do what's optimal.
In regards to using the RIR, I was saying the only case that I would use it with is with an athlete that I trust and is well experienced, and I would use it if we're seeing some sort of halt in progression and where I think that minimizing the FT could come in use, and it'll probably only be on like pound movements like a squat variation or something like that, where there is so much more fatigue generated from that movement. But For the vast majority of people, I really do believe it is just a hindrance in every aspect because, for one, again, they don't know how to train a true failure. Their perception of what effort is skewed. So therefore, their idea of RIR is just incorrect. It's not incorrect, but it's just not what it really could be in reality, right? And their perception of RER could entirely be dictated by how they feel on that day because there's so many other variables that go into it. So, just saying go as hard as you fucking can on this set and go to absolute failure is the safest bet for the 99% of people. And then it is a mental hindrance too, right? Like I don't use it because I've done it before. And like going into a set where it's like, okay, I'm going to leave 1 rep in reserve or 2 reps in reserve. And you're thinking about this and you're trying to like measure it out in your head. Like, okay, how many was that? It's like, there's mental fatigue that happens as well, which nobody talks about, and it's distracting from the set. Yeah. And I don't know, again, people say this shit, and it's like they have no experience, even with themselves or obviously not with others. We're like, oh, how is that a mental hindrance? How is logging, how is using a logbook, writing down a notes, how is that a distraction? It's like, I really don't know how else to word it, but when I could just go into a set and not have to fucking think about anything other than driving this with my chest for as long as I can fucking go until it gives out, that's it. That's my main priority. I'm one track minded in the set. I'm not thinking about anything outside of that, right? And I don't need to think of myself, okay, I need to stop here, right? It's just like that is a very poor way to approach training, at least for myself, right? Not everybody's going to be the same, so maybe it's better for you. I don't fucking know. But then with logbooking too, it's the same thing where if I'm stopping and writing down notes because I've done it for a long time, I've done it during my recovery process. But when I'm actually training like a bodybuilder, I mean, I could take mental note of the things that are important. Yeah. If I'm doing dumbbell press consistently, I'm pretty consistent with the majority of my movements. I have some rotations in there. It's like, okay, I know I did 100s for 6 reps or whatever last week, so we're going to try to aggressively overload on that. But when you're logbooking, again, there's so many variables that go into it, right? And none of those variables are accounted for. How much did you sleep that night? How much water did you drink going into this training? How many meals did you have going into this training session? How are you feeling this day? How's your level of stress? What's going on in your life? Like all of these things play into what happens during that set. It's not just this thing that relies on one sole variable. And the logbook in itself doesn't reflect that. You're not going to remember all that just looking back on this shit. So people get very hyper focused on this, and it's not always, I don't want to say it's a bad thing because I don't think it's a bad thing at all. It's just, it's not a good thing for everybody. And it can be distracting in their session as well. When I'm sitting down, I have to stop and write shit down. It's like, I don't want to do that. It's like, I'm in my zone, I'm focused. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand that. Again, maybe it's for you, maybe it's not. Some people think, oh, it's no big deal, just sitting down, writing my phone. It's like, I don't even like to look at my phone when I'm training. And people don't realize how much of a difference that also makes as well. It's just the focus aspect, being one track minded. I remember when I started training, I would always just put my phone on airplane mode and I wouldn't have anything, because going on your phone, even if you're changing songs, like then you end up scrolling on shit. It takes away your focus. And when you're just completely locked into that session, it does make a difference.
Yeah. So then a counter argument would be like, well, can't you have a good workout? Can't you train hard? Can't you build muscle, without doing that? Sure. But also I think it depends on the person and it depends on your training level. So some people, don't need to take it that serious and could just, just go in the gym and, train hard within their set and then just, goof off, laugh around. That's perfectly fine. I might do that sometimes too, but also I'm going to have workouts where like I'm fucking serious and like I don't want to talk to anybody in between my sets and smell some shit. And then also a beginner isn't going to really understand what we're talking about when it comes to, that mentality when it comes to training is, if you're what?
This brings up a good question. I put up a story. We got some questions here, but okay. One of the first questions I saw was, how do you be a better student of the game of bodybuilding? I feel like that's kind of what you were leading into.
Kind of, yeah. I was going to say that it's not as much of a demand for someone to take a set to failure, because failure is subjective and relative. For a 15-year-old kid who's 140 pounds to take a set of, a machine chest press to failure, it doesn't take that much intensity to do that at that point. Now, you could also learn how to take a set further. And then, at that point, what do you call that? If 100 pounds for 10 reps on a machine was your definition of failure, and then you had, Mir Sub come in there and get you to get 10 more reps and you just got 20 reps on the same set, what is that? 10 reps past failure, or is that failure? So, there's levels to understanding what failure is, but also when you're going into the gym, that should be your goal also, is to learn how to progress your capacity for training to failure so that you can get to that point where having that serious mentality in your set actually does make a difference. You said, how can you be a better student of the game? There's the obvious answer, which is fucking learn more and, well, yeah, listen, but also, you know, invest in coaches, mentorships, all that. But I think, you know, just like individual wise, personality wise, mentality wise, if you can go around everything with an open mind, you know, no matter how advanced into this you are, like I've been doing this for 10 years now and I'm still learning. That's the thing, is like, if you're 1 year, 3 years into this and you think you know what you're talking about and you think you know your shit, like I did when I was a few years into training, you don't know your shit. You're going to keep learning more and then realize, oh shit, I didn't know shit. And you're going to continue to learn if you keep an open mind. But as soon as you close that mind and you're like, okay, I know everything, no one can teach me anymore, now other people are going to pass you up. And other people are going to learn more. Other people are going to stay open-minded. And that's a huge thing, is just being open-minded to being wrong and to learning more. And then also, you know, understanding that there is no one size fits all. There is no, you know, the absolutes. There is no always and never. Everything always depends. And that's the hard part for people to actually understand, is there's never like going to be an easy answer for most things. And it's so person dependent that with training, with diet, with any sort of recommendation that you hear online, you should take that. Don't just completely discourage it. You know, oh, this person said always do this or never do this. Don't completely discard it because they said always or never, but take it, put it in the back of your head, and now try to find something else from somebody else that you might trust and see if they say, you know, something, you know, similar, you know, a month later or something. And you can start to put puzzle pieces together over time to figure out what you agree with, what you disagree with, what actually makes sense to you. And then over time, you'll have your own opinions, versus if you just hear something from one person, which this happens a lot. You know, you'll hear even like some science-based, you know, influencer or creator, they hear something from one person that they trust, and now automatically they're going to start spewing exactly what they just said, but butchering it and making it sound, you know, kind of stupid. And that's not how you should go about, you know, your own knowledge and information. So what I'm talking about, what I'm saying, these are things that I've figured out, I've heard from different people, and I might have heard contradicting things from other people, but based on my own internal understanding of how things work and my own experience is another thing also, is you got to be patient and get the experience before you can actually, you know, make these types of judgments and calls. You can have theories all you want, but experience really is what actually works in reality.
So as far as how to become a better student of the game, aka bodybuilding, I would point it out to a few things. Like you said, you need to listen. You need to be very open-minded. You need to detach yourself from your ego, which is easier said than done. You need to understand that you never know anything. Not anything. You never know everything. There's always more that you could know. There's always something that you could be missing. You should want to question everything and want to explore reasoning behind things and understand that all the literature out there, there's holes in all of it, right? So you can't take any piece of literature and then just abide by that as the golden rule. Obviously, there is nuance within that. There's context within that. But when we're talking about training methodologies, nutritional approaches, things of that nature, there is so much nuance within it. Individual circumstances are what matter over everything else. Like I said, there's always going to be examples where it's just black and white. Obviously, like a dumbbell curl works a bicep. We know that nobody's going to say that it works a fucking tricep. That would be retarded.
I think it works your calves.
What?
I think it works your calves.
Yeah, maybe it works the gastroc. But detaching from your ego, not becoming these kids that you see on the internet who have fallen into this Dunning-Kruger cycle. Don't listen to people that don't have experience. I can't emphasize that enough, right? Knowledge without experience means nothing. And experience in itself doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot, but there's almost always something that you can gain from experience. So even if you take some meathead out of the YMCA that has all the experience in the world, he got fucking huge, he abused gear, but he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about, I can guarantee you there's something that he still would be able to pass down to you that would be of use, even if he doesn't understand exactly how it works, or his idea of how it works could be entirely false and he could be talking about some bullshit. There is stuff that he could pass on to you that you would benefit from. And then maybe you just take that and you try to explore, why is he doing that? And then you explore like more into the scientific reasoning behind it and come up with your conclusions. But somebody that just has knowledge, like these kids you see, these skinny dorks, they're not even dorks because they're not even smart. They're like, they want to be dorks. Bodybuilders are dorks, realistically, I guess the smart ones. But these kids don't have experience, right? So they take what they see in literature and think that is the golden rule and don't understand context outside of that. And without the experience, what you say holds no weight. It doesn't matter. You should not be listening to these people because they have no real world practical application, not even with themselves, not with other people for sure. So why the fuck would you care about anything they have to say just because they're regurgitating some abstract that they read online and they don't even understand or know how to read literature? Because I can guarantee you, none of these kids know how to interpret a study in the first place because they obviously miss all the holes within it. And this is why I've had to constantly debunk a bunch of the shit that they say because they always miss this. But it's like you go to a lawyer, you finish law school, and then a guy comes out of law school and he goes and tells the lawyer that's been doing this for 30 years, like, well, actually, according to what they taught us here, like, you should be presenting it like this. And the guy's just like, well, I've won 100 cases. What the fuck have you done? Obviously, I don't care what you read in the book. I don't care what might look the best. This is what actually has helped me win the cases, right? So maybe there's a reasoning behind that, or maybe there's not. Maybe he has just done it so many times and he's like, this is what fucking works. I don't care what they told you. And that's what it really comes down to, is the people who have actually provided the results and explored things outside of what is just supposed to be the best on paper. Because if we're going by that, look back a few years ago, because now all of a sudden this community thinks they're the smartest people on earth and they have everything figured out. But those same people 10 years ago, if they were doing everything that way, now those same people were fucking wrong about everything, right? Now they were just, let's just chase metabolic stress. Let's do all that. And like, this is the scientific evidence that we had. This was the literature. But now all that is diminished, right? So if you're limited to just these concepts, you are going to be left behind.
Yeah, even with protein intake, that was a misconception that you only need 1 gram per pound of body weight. And then, bodybuilding coaches have been saying, it's kind of bullshit, but, they're not going to say that out loud just because they're going to be seen as wrong, but they're still giving their clients, way more protein than that. And they're benefiting. And that's the reality of it, is having that experience and the actual proof that it works. And then eventually 10 years later, there's a study that says, we can actually absorb, 100 grams of protein in a sitting.
That study was bullshit too, though. But yes, I mean, obviously, I agree with you on the higher protein intake.
Yeah, and so you're, going to get left behind if you're just staying in theory. But I think the best, advice for if you want to be the best bodybuilder you can be, if you want to be the best coach or personal trainer you can be, is, yes, learn as much as possible. You don't want to just be some dumb meathead. Invest in learning. Don't be, scared to put your money into learning, but also get experience.
Get experience. Like I said, question everything. There's always more to know. There's always more to figure out. This happens a lot, even with like older bodybuilding coaches, right? They get stuck just on their experience and refuse to think outside of that box, which is also a red flag. So like, you don't want to be on either ends of the extreme where it's just like, okay, my antidotes are only what matters. I refuse to feed into any of this. Like, I can see the arguments for a lot of this new shit that comes down. A lot of it makes sense, and I know how to put it into practice, but that's because I have the experience and practical application to understand how it works and where its place actually is, and where the other stuff might fit into place based off of what I've experienced as well, even if I don't have a full scientific mechanism breakdown for you, because maybe we just haven't discovered it yet, but we've seen that it works time and time again. And just question everything. Even when you think you understand something, you're just like, okay, well, why does this really work? Why could this potentially be doing this? Is there something that we haven't figured out? Like, just always keep an open mind and always want to understand more. And if there's ever a point where you think you have figured out the best approach, the most optimal way, that should be your first sign to tell yourself that you actually don't know fucking anything.
Yeah, or that also the fact that it's probably going to change. You might think you know something that's working, and that's great, it's working, but it's probably not going to work forever. And, even with, let's say, what's optimal right now, that hasn't always been the case, with the actual proof. How come, the top 10 Mr. Olympian, competitors, they don't train the way that, is scientifically optimal or literature-based optimal?
And I'm usually they don't like those examples because obviously those are genetic freaks.
They're genetic freaks, so. Yeah, but still, people who have put on a bunch of muscle, regardless of genetics, people who, just look at huge bodybuilders, whether they, you know, are competing at Olympia, whether they're pros, whether they're just some big fucking dude at your gym that has a crazy physique. How many of them got to that point doing 4 reps per set, 1 set, you know, 1 rep in reserve, you know, all this, you know, like tailored scientific way of training. They got jacked without it. You can probably do it too. And then you can also use, I'm not saying to throw out what could be a good theory, try it and see if you like it. And if you don't, then there's your answer. And then maybe try it again in a few years. You might like it then. That's the way to, you know, actually advance your physique, is to try shit, see if you like it or don't like it. And if you don't like it, then switch it out to something else, rather than just trying to do what you're told and stick something even if it's not working. You have to actually be looking objectively at your progress and based on your response, and then make changes based on that, because you have to look at yourself as an individual too.
There's too much analysis paralysis. There's too much overcomplication of these things. I'm not saying it's not complicated, because it does get very, very, very complicated. But the people who are worried about these things are not the people that should be worried about them. I understand you want to learn, you want to do things the best possible way, but understand there's no best possible way. Anybody that says otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. Again, what's best for you today could be different tomorrow and the next year from now. And really, fuck, where was I going with that?
You're going to say you should hire a coach so that you can learn how to actually train hard.
I was going to say that. Hard work beats everything at the end of the day. It really does. Obviously, there's an extreme end of that example if you're just doing everything fucking wrong. But even then, look at Branch Warren.
Yeah.
Genetics play a factor into that, but you could try to do things the best by the book, and maybe they even are the best by the book. But if you have this analysis paralysis going on and you're in your head about things and you're worried, oh my God, I'm going to fucking produce too much fatigue on this set, I got to save 2 reps in reserve. The motherfucker that just goes in there and goes hard and goes to failure and doesn't think about fucking anything, because his passion and drive for the sport and wants it more than anything, is going to beat you. He will beat you 10 out of 10 times, no ifs, ands, or buts, unless you just have a superior fucking genetics.
Yep.
And it comes down to that a lot in bodybuilding. But it really, if we're talking from a competitive bodybuilding standpoint, a lot of these people really just need to hire a coach, stop thinking, and fucking work. And that's not me saying that you shouldn't try to learn and stuff, but it's just like, you're not doing what you should be doing to get to where you think you want to go. Like you say you want to look like Chris Bump said, you say you want to go this far. Again, depends who we're talking to, but if you're that type of person, the guy who just goes in there and has passion and doesn't give a fuck about any of this stuff is going to beat you.
Yep. Passion goes a long way, and that's not something you can really prove with science or literature.
I mean, you probably could. Some psychological aspect, adrenaline,
Yeah, but I'm saying there aren't studies right now that are showing bodybuilders who have more passion, or, you know, that they're making better progress. I just think anecdotally, you know, and based on...
There probably is a study. We just haven't found. There probably is. I'm sure there's literature out there that says if you are passionate towards something, you will see better results.
Well, yeah, in that aspect, in general, probably. But with bodybuilding specifically, I guess it's just, you know, extrapolated to that, to bodybuilding.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't... There's not a lot of... I don't want to say there's not a lot of passion, because I don't know. Maybe there is. I don't know. This is the thing. I don't know a lot of things. I don't know if you should do 4 reps. I don't know if you should do 12. I don't know what's going to be best for you. I don't know anything about you. And that's what all you need to take away from this is you play around it. You figure it out. Stick with it for X amount of time. See what happens. Try different approaches. You're not going to see things overnight. Track your progress. Take pictures. And even better, hire a coach, and they'll do all this shit for you.
Yeah.
Let's go over some of these questions here.
Mm-hmm.
3-hour podcast on Katz. My cats were just in the room and now they have left, so that is unfortunately not going to be possible during this episode.
Oh, one thing based on what we were just talking about with passion is I saw some bullshit, and I've seen it a few times now, where people are saying that grunting and making a face while you're training is suboptimal, and that you're taking energy away from the actual set.
They would always say that anytime I post videos of me squatting, but guess what? I'm squatting more than all of them. At least that's better.
I'm heavier than all of you. I'm bigger than all of you.
But that's retarded because it's adrenaline, right? You're getting more out of the movement. You're hyping yourself up. It's like it becomes an animalistic thing, and people don't get this because they're not passionate about bodybuilding and they train like pussies and they don't understand that realm. I'm not saying you have to. Like, you don't have to, right? The fucking 40-year-old guy that might be watching this and just wants to look better for his kids, like, this is nothing to pertain with you. Like, you can go and train comfortably and, just be healthier. That's awesome. Good for you. Yep. But if you are trying to competitively bodybuild, this is a sport. I don't care what you want to call it. It's a competition, right? You need to be driven, and it's even a competition against your fucking self, right? Do better than last time. A lot of bodybuilders come from dark places. A lot of them have, things going on or went on in their life, and a lot of that aggression is built up and comes out in the gym, and it helps them get further. And even if that's not the case, even if they're not fucking fucked in the head, right? Just generating that level of aggression from anything and that adrenaline response, you're always going to get more out of a set, right? I don't want to hear anything about, oh, you're fucking grunting, that's going to take away, because I don't even know how anybody could say that if they've ever done a set like that.
So obviously, if you're excessively yelling just to yell, that's one thing. That's kind of retarded. But the thing that these, like people who are saying you shouldn't grunt because they're taking energy away from the set, if we're going to look at the science of it, adrenaline, or specifically epinephrine and norepinephrine, these are also neuromodulators, which are going to make your motor neurons more receptive to the action potential, which is basically this electrical signal, this chemical signal that goes from your spinal cord to the motor neuron, which excites and contracts these muscle fibers. So if you're able to get more out of a single signal in order to contract, you're going to be able to lift more and use more muscle fibers just from having more adrenaline. So think of, a mom lifting a car off of her baby, or if you get into a fight, or, things where your adrenaline is higher, you're going to be stronger versus where your adrenaline is a lot lower. Let's say first thing in the morning, how tight of a fist can you make right when you wake out, right when you wake up out of bed? Or if you can bench 315 in the gym, you can't do that first thing when you wake up, in bed. Adrenaline plays a huge role in just the ability to recruit muscle fibers and motor units, the motor neurons and muscle fibers. And that's something that isn't talked about also in that aspect of, grunting is suboptimal. If it comes out because you're training fucking hard, that's a good thing. And if you're thinking about, oh, I shouldn't be grunting, I should be quiet, and I should not make a face, and I should just be serious, and you're intentionally trying to do that because you think it's going to be better, then you're holding yourself back from training hard.
Thoughts on the new wave of main gaining and building optimally? Okay, well, I already went over this in a previous podcast, but I guess we could touch on it real quick before Adam has to leave here. This isn't new. None of this is new. It's been around for years. It just has become a trend again this year. Building optimally. I kind of fucking hate that word.
And main gaining.
Main gaining, right? These are... It's just like bullshit terminology, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking about this earlier too. Like, I don't look at any of this stuff in terms of, am I in a surplus? Am I at maintenance? That's not the way that I approach anything. It's, are we trying to prioritize growth, or are we trying to prioritize fat loss? And even if we're trying to prioritize fat loss, growth is still going to occur if done correctly under the right conditions. If you're in a very aggressive tail end of like a prep or a cutting phase, not as much, especially if you're natural. But it's really just about formulating the protocol to get the result that you want, right? If you want to get fat as fuck, then obviously be in a huge surplus, but that's not how muscle growth works, right? It's about getting the most use out of the food that you are consuming to do the job that you want it to do, right? So going into a surplus past a certain point, what benefit is that providing to you in terms of hypertrophy? And it's not, at least in many cases, not in any case that I can really think of off the top of my head right now. It's just frequently consuming protein, keeping protein to this elevated, getting in enough of that protein to do the job effectively, and make sure you're staying in a positive protein,
nitrogen balancing.
Yeah, and you're keeping yourself anabolic essentially. This is why you can't eat 1 or 2 meals a day, right? Meal timing, nutrient timing, all this stuff is very crucial. Timing carbohydrates effectively around training, and then where else they fit, depending. It all depends on the person's schedule, what their life is like, what their level of activity is like, the type of genetics they have, their structure. But we're just formulating plans to keep the person relatively lean. We never want to stray too far in body fat, because once you get too high in body fat, you're not going to be able to build tissue as effectively. You're going to have higher estrogen. You're going to have more inflammation. You're going to be less healthy. You're going to have to pull back, right? And sometimes you get to that point, but it's never intentionally. And once you do it so many times, you kind of figure out how, at least if you're paying attention, or if you're a coach, you should be paying attention to your clients and understanding how they respond to shit and changing the ways that you do things moving forward to make sure they don't go off into the deep end. But I don't like main gaining to me and not being a surplus is like you're just approaching nutrition in a growth phase the proper way. That's all it is, right? I'm not looking at calorie maintenance, calorie surplus. Like I'm just looking at what is this food doing and then adjusting it as needed based off of the response to the individual, how their pumps are in the gym, what their weight is moving on the scale. Sometimes it doesn't need to move at all. Sometimes if they're stuck at something and depending on their composition, it's like, okay, we should probably be adding in some weight here. We should probably be growing a bit more, increase the food. It depends on their recovery, how their sleep is. Like all these things come into effect. But I don't really like saying main gaining or I'm at maintenance or I'm in the surplus because it's just not how I look at food.
So I think actually a good analogy I just thought of would be shooting a basketball. If you're, shooting a basketball into a hoop, I would say figuring out how to shoot is a good starting point. You want to have your hands in the right position, you want to have good form and all that. That's good, but that's not the end result. That's not what's going to actually, be the response that you want. That's a good starting point. What you're actually looking for is the ball going in the hoop? Or where is it going? Are you overshooting it? Are you undershooting it? And so you want to look at your response and then change the stimulus or, how you're shooting it. Look at me being a Jew, just shooting. Being a Jew, but Jews can't hoop. So.
Jews can't hoop?
No, we're not athletic very much.
I thought they were Hasidics at the court all the time.
Yeah, but they're playing each other.
They're playing each other.
Yeah. So you don't want to be, just looking at both.
Adam Sandler balls all the time. He's the most famous Jew in the world.
He's an exception. He's good about. So there are good Jewish basketball players. Like when I grew up, I'm Jewish, by the way. So if when I grew up, I have friends that play basketball, but like it's a stereotype. Jews can't jump. Jews can't
jump.
Yeah, I mean I can't. But
okay, that's because you lift though.
I'm almost 220 at 5'8".
If you didn't lift, you could have a pretty high vertical.
Potentially, yeah. We're good at counting money and, saying so focused.
Taking over the world here.
Okay, so you shouldn't just be looking at a calorie intake. If you're main gaining, that's the idea, is you're, I'm burning 2,000 calories every single day, right? So I'm going to be eating 2,100 or 2,200.
But that changes. There's also a range.
I know. Imagine if, if I sneeze, I'm burning an extra calorie than if I didn't sneeze. If I had a doctor's appointment, I'm burning more calories.
Motherfuckers change your meal plan based on times sneezed.
No, they sneeze 10 times a day. I want to eat an extra 10 calories.
Listen, shit you doing, prep? Just to justify?
I had to eat an extra potato because you had sex one time.
There's one gummy.
One time when I was at my first prep, I haven't told anybody this, but I was like 3 weeks out or something, and I was like, all right, well, I know I'm getting flat right now. I didn't know shit back then. And so I was like, well, I just had like some extra sex right now. And I was like, well, I just burned extra calories and I'm not being consistent, so I got to eat an extra like 20 grams of potatoes.
That's crazy.
Anyways, you shouldn't be looking at just the calorie intake. You want to be looking at the response. So an example of my own experience was I've been bulking for a while, and I started getting to a point where my pumps weren't as good. I wasn't performing as well in the gym. I wasn't noticeably getting bigger, fuller, stronger, but I was still eating a lot of food. And also my digestion started getting worse. I started having more acid reflux. I started feeling more bloated and just wasn't digesting as quickly. So if you're just looking at, the simple way to build muscle is be in a calorie surplus, right? Then
that doesn't mean you're going to build muscle at all, though.
I know. And so, if you're looking at it that way, then you're going to be probably putting on extra body fat at that point and building less muscle, versus what I did was I pulled back on my food and my digestion improved, which helped my absorption, helped my insulin sensitivity, and I started having way better pumps. Even the first day, what I did actually was I fasted the whole entire day until about 2 or 3 p.m., had a pre-workout meal, and then I went and trained, and I had a crazy good workout. Mm-hmm. Generally, you would think, oh, well, you barely ate that day, you only had one meal, you shouldn't be, but I'm not going to get that flat in glycogen. So I improved my absorption, I improved my insulin sensitivity, and so pulling back in food, regardless of what the actual calorie number is, I never look at calorie numbers, macro numbers. I look at the actual meal plan itself, how much food I'm eating, changing that based on the response. I'm changing how I'm shooting the basketball, where my arm is, how hard I'm throwing, based on what's actually happening at the hoop. not just only focusing how much I'm throwing and how hard I'm throwing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the general answer is that yes, it maintaining in itself, that concept or building a calorie maintenance is absolutely true. Sure. It's not incorrect whatsoever. I mean, you could build a shit ton of muscle in a deficit technically, but like you have metabolic adaptations that occur over time as well. So it's like understanding, if you're just looking at these things and like plugging numbers into a calorie calculator, that's going to be wrong. Those cannot give you accurate representations of anything unless you just happen to get lucky and get a good fucking equation. But it just takes trial and error to figure out, you know, where you really need to be at. If you want to track calories and macros, that's fine. I mean, I do calculations, but I just have them there noted so I can reference to them if I need that data. But it's not like that's the determining factor as to what I'm doing. It's like I need to be at 2,700 calories. Like that's not how it works. I build out the plan as to what this individual needs, look at all the variables that come into effect, and then build up that total amount. And then I look at that data and it's like, okay, well, this is adding up to this much. Like I probably overshot, but once you've been doing this for so long that you're not going to do that. But it just gives you data to reflect on. That's all it really is it's just data. And then if you're using this approach is like maintaining, like you're going to find a food amount that's going to put you in that range. You're not going to be gaining substantial weight at any accelerated rate. If you're gaining a little bit of weight, I don't think there's any issue with that. I think it's even warranted in cases depending on the circumstances. I can't tell you what it needs to be done for you if I don't work with you. But if you're using those approaches, you're doing everything right. The answer is yes. You don't need to be in some big surplus to build muscle, right? It's not holding any additional benefit to you. If you need more food, it's not because you necessarily need a surplus. It's because you have a metabolic adaptation that has occurred, or you have these higher demands to the point where you need more food, and that's where that's going to come into play. It's not like you're just adding in food for the sake of I need a bigger surplus, more calories. That's just not how muscle building works.
Right. But then on the other hand, you also have to look at the fact that, like you hinted at it, is your metabolism changes. So if you're getting stronger in the gym, or maybe you got a new job and you're more active, whatever it is.
You take steroids.
You got to take steroids. No.
If you take steroids, you can have metabolic responses.
If you hop on a cycle, like that's going to increase your calorie expenditure and your caloric requirement, and also your ability to synthesize more muscle proteins. So in that case, you'd want to bump up your food. But also for somebody who's natural, if you're not progressing in the gym, I can't give you this is what you have to do because it depends. Are you too fat? Are you too, are you not eating enough? So you want to eat enough in order to progress in the gym, but you also want to maintain your insulin sensitivity. So if you think you're under eating a little bit, you're lean, you're not pushing food down like crazy multiple times per day. Maybe you're pushing food a lot, 3 times a day, but in that case, you might not be eating enough food. And so you might want to pull back on how much you're eating in each meal and eat more times per day to get more total food in the entire day. And that might have a more beneficial effect simply just on your training because you're getting more food in while staying insulin sensitive. And if you're able to eat enough food without getting fat, that's probably going to build more muscle up until a certain point, until you start to get to you start running over your own feet. You start to eat too much food. You start getting some cheat meals. You decrease your insulin sensitivity. And then at that point, it doesn't make sense to keep the food where it is or push food even higher because your training decreased. At that point, that's where you pull back. So it can be difficult to try to figure this out on your own. You could.
It's a learning process. You need to understand a lot about nutrition. You need to understand a lot about physiology. And it's really just trial and error experimentation and putting these things into practice. And it's like you're not going to find a study that gives you the answer as to how to do this stuff as with anything, because you can look at all this stuff and then look at somebody and think you're doing all this stuff right, and then the response just doesn't happen. Right. So now why is that not occurring?
If you don't know where to start, do you eat 1,000 calories? Do you eat 3,000 calories? You have no idea. Then sure, it might give you a ballpark answer to start from versus just starting. But also, like, another good starting point would be to simply just write down what you've been eating. Write down what you've been eating the past 3 days or the next 3 days. And you could, write it down on paper. You can put it into MyFitnessPal. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to track accurately on MyFitnessPal, surprisingly.
You're never going to be completely accurate.
Well, no, never completely accurate. But like, for example, weighing food raw versus cooked is a huge issue with, how you cook it, but also even remembering to type in, cooked white rice or cooked jasmine rice or, raw chicken breast, cooked chicken breast, grilled chicken breast. It's difficult to do it And the, value in it is it gives you some sort of starting point. And if you are tracking macros, there's a level of consistency to where you can do that if you want to. But, I'd say, in my opinion and based on my experience, it's kind of unnecessary and kind of pointless to be, using these macro calculators and tracking macros.
Macro calculators don't make any sense to me. People always ask us, well, what percentage is your fats at? Like, I've never fucking thought about that in my life, the percentage of the fats. Like, I'm never looking at the percentage of the caloric value and then breaking that into percentages for what I want each macronutrient to be, because it's just not how it works.
I've done it for fun, and it would end up just being pointless because, like, I'd be curious just because, there's the recommendation of 15 to 25%, 20 to 30% of your fats coming from your total calories. And so I'd just be curious a few times, where I would just figure it out, and I would see that, it's always in that range. So it's not like I have to calculate how many fats they should have because of these guidelines. No, just this is what their fats are at right now based on the macros that I just tracked from their meal plan or that I, thought of in my head. And it happens to be 15, 20, 25%, whatever. And, the merit that I could see in it would be, women might do better, higher in fat, higher ratio of fats to carbs. So I might, want to just see, where are their fats at? And, are they at 15% or are they at 25%? And I might want them closer to 25%. But most of the time, especially with men, it really doesn't fucking matter. Especially with men who are not natural, it really doesn't fucking matter. I mean, it matters because you don't want your fats to be too high.
I mean, I don't look at that at all. Because like you said, like, say we start titrating food, if I go from 3,000 to 3,500 calories, what is the reason for my fat staying at 15%? What do I need my fat to relatively increase to that?
Exactly. You wouldn't want to increase your fats generally, but to an extent, if you get it to a point, like I wouldn't base it on percentages. I would
or even protein, because protein usually stays at a base point. Then you don't really. The main thing you're usually adjusting is carbohydrates.
Exactly, yeah. And percentages really just don't fucking matter. It's just like, it happens to be that percentage. I'm not gonna be changing protein very much. I might increase it in a cut. I might decrease it if appetite sucks in a bulk. Fats, I might increase it if it's too hard to eat too many carbs. I push the carbs up as high as possible, and now I need to throw in a little bit of fats.
But then you're looking at fats from the terms of like fitting into the caloric value, right? Again, we're coming back to it all is what is that food doing for me at that point in time? Like, why do I need fats right now? Is aside from a base hormonal functional standpoint, which isn't a lot of fats, you could place those where it's best suited in that day, right? If you wake up and you have no appetite, eating a bunch of fats in the morning probably isn't going to be the best, and you're probably going to affect your appetite for the following meals.
Yep.
Might be better suited for at night. If you are somebody who gets very hungry at night and you start to have cravings, if you feel like you're crashing every time you work out, maybe adding in 5 to 10 grams of fat could be beneficial there. Otherwise, you really don't want fat in pre-workout meals. So, and then you're looking at, obviously frequent protein throughout the day, carbohydrates where they need to be, and then if you're titrating up, you fill in the gaps where it makes the most sense. But like, we're looking at what is this food doing for the individual at this point in time. Why does it make sense to have here? A calorie is not a calorie, protein is not protein, carbohydrate is not just a carbohydrate. There's a difference between what fucking blueberry with fiber in it and fructose is going to do versus jasmine rice, right? So it goes a lot deeper.
Yeah, more than just macros.
But you gotta
do have to get going.
It's time for you to head out. I'm gonna wrap it up.
I got one more thing to say.
Okay, let's hear it.
So this is my scientific optimal perspective: is you don't grow when you're in the gym.
What?
You grow outside the gym when you're resting.
Yeah.
So theoretically, based on that science right there, why would you train if you can grow more when you're just resting? So why not just rest 7 days a week and train 0 days a week?
Because you need to create the fucking stimulus.
It's simply just the fact that you don't grow in the gym, you grow outside the gym. So just stay outside the gym and you'll grow faster.
This is something that one of those kids would like come to the conclusion of if they said, who one guy would train 2 days a week and somebody else trained 7 days a week, and the other guy who trained 2 somehow got better progress because the other guy just fucking. I feel like the other guy would still make more progress, but then they'd be like, oh, well, let's just train 1 or 2 days a week.
Yeah, let's just fucking go full force, do 0.
Which you could. I mean, if it's all you have access to and, you're married from the block with 3 kids and no alimony, sure, do what you can. But if you are a wanting to be the next Mr. Olympia.
Probably train more than 0 times per week or 1 or 2.
That's a great observation, Adam.
Thank you.
Is that all you got? Was that your closing argument?
Yes. Don't train, just rest.
Okay. You heard it here first. This is not an official studio. I mean, I should probably set it up. I don't know how I want it to look. Maybe if I get a sponsor that pays me, $3 million like Tom Segura to paint my wall, that would be ideal if you're listening to this. But we're gonna set up a podcast studio here. Try to get some people on in person, just because. Why not? You got to progressively overload the podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's all we got for you guys today. Adam's going back to Texas now, so we're gonna go. Yeah, then back to Arizona, the desert. If you live in Arizona, it sucks. You should move. But that's all. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, any feedback you guys have. And we'll see you on the next episode of Brass Tack Bodybuilding. Peace.